Interested in your take on this, Andy, because it was suggested to me on a comment on my YouTube that Watson was a bit of a foodie at first, and then because he was forced to, he had to talk about health and food in the early years because of that thing about everybody's gonna die thing.
Mm-hmm.
Then Cross comes along, and it seems that Cross possibly radicalized Watson, and so maybe that is what feeds into Watson being so praising of Cross
I would
afterwards.
say so.
Yeah.
I would say that's what the evidence kind of suggests, definitely. I think that Watson was always kind of ethically there too. Yeah, I would say that his motivations weren't so that he was like a foodie by choice, more so that that was just what the information everyone wanted all the time was. And I suppose for a few years they did need to prove to everyone around them. I mean, look at Ronnie's story from last week about his mum. You know, this is all these years later. So I suppose for a while, a good couple of years, they did need to prove to everyone close to them that they weren't going to die.
I'm trying to keep you on. Are you still there, Ronnie?
Yes, I was going to say, because they kind of came out of the vegetarian society, didn't they?
Mm.
That was very much focused on food, wasn't it, and diets. You know, it wasn't really a kind of ethical component to that as such.
That's a really good point too, yeah. I wonder how many of people in the vegetarian society before the vegan society was founded were vegetarian for ethical reasons.
Yeah, well, I mean, just going back to Watson, though, like we were saying about the foodie bit, that's contradicted pretty much by the 1945 thing, isn't it, about
It's
sentient
also
life?
contradicted quite a bit by his various interviews over the years where he talks about like his upbringing and that kind of stuff, yeah. Because you go back to that story he tells about his childhood, where he refers to his uncle and his mate who brings in the gander, and his uncle makes the claim that he doesn't touch meat, he won't kill anyone. Now, that's when he's a teenager. So the ethics were there as far as he portrays for a long time before. It wasn't just a food thing. He recognised the moral wrong.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was a conscientious objector, like after the First World War, basically. So like, again, this predates the vegan society. Yeah, he definitely ethically opposed these things.
Yeah, well, I guess that's probably why he was on the kind of radical fringe of vegetarianism, I suppose.
Yeah, I would possibly look at it as like that potentially did happen though. He probably got a bit caught up in the this is what we have to do, and then Cross probably came around and said, well, look, we've got people now to focus on the food, let's start talking about the other stuff.
I think they had a bit of a series of dilemmas, because I mean, Watson said in the first Vegan News, and that was November 44, that what's going to be our relationship with vegetarians, because it was an issue. He was kind of aware that veganism was a critique of vegetarianism.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
he called it a moral halfway house. He even kind of had a bit of a swear word for them. He called them the lactose. And yet at the same time, he said that we need to work with them, or we need to be sympathetic to them, type of thing. And so I think that, going back to Ronnie's point, that this kind of divorce, this separation from the vegetarians was a bit of a shock, because first of all, they didn't see it coming. So they had the shock of the Second World War, and then they had the shock of the fact that suddenly they were running a social movement, and none of them had a inkling at all that was what's going to happen.
Yeah,
it was just like crash landed on their desk, as it were.
And I think as well, I would imagine that some of the relationships that were there when they first sort of asked the question, hey, can we have like a sister society within the vegetarian society? And the answer was no, were probably slowly burned as time went on. In the same way that when we spend any time with a non-vegan, they're naturally defensive because you're kind of showing that they're not doing enough. Well, that would have been exactly the same in the vegetarian society. All of a sudden, the vegan society have popped up to say, well, hang on a minute, you're not doing enough. And it's a constant reminder of that.
Yeah, that's interesting, that actually, because I've always assumed that if the vegetarians had said yes, that would have been the end of vegan philosophy. But say if it wasn't, then it means that there'll be a hell of a lot of internal pressure created by the fact that, as you say, you've got this faction that, even whether they wanted to or not, looked a little bit holier than thou, and could have really kind of created a schism within the vegetarian society.
Yeah, I would imagine, obviously, just like there always is within these groups, that when they first put that idea out, and especially when they first founded the society, there'd have been members of the vegetarian society that were supportive, and there'd have been some that were drastically opposed. But yeah, I
Well,
mean, what within the president's address that we read out last week, it says, doesn't it? It's George Henderson's intro, but he says that like some people were really happy with the talk and some people weren't, and I could imagine that that was the case. Yeah, absolutely. Some people would have come to the realization that hang on a minute, they've got a point, and others would have been like, I don't want to change.